I crossed the threshold with a suitcase in one hand and a carefully wrapped gift in the other. The silence hit me first. It was a deep, waiting quiet, all wrong for December 23rd. The air held no trace of cinnamon or pine, and the familiar soundtrack of Nat King Cole's Christmas album was conspicuously absent from my mom's kitchen speaker. Just hollow stillness. Then the door swung open. "Oh, Melissa, you're early," my mother said, her tone flat with surprise. She stepped back to let me in but did not reach for a hug. Over her shoulder, in the dim hallway, I saw a neat pyramid of 4 identical suitcases, sleek and new. From the kitchen, my sister Sierra's voice carried, bright and effortless. "You won't believe the resort. Jeremy says they have a butler service that even handles the ironing." My feet stayed rooted to the welcome mat. A cold, dense weight began to solidify in my chest, a feeling without a name. For 3 months, I had built this moment. 2 jobs, the pre-dawn shift at the campus cafe smelling of burnt coffee, and the late-night hours at the library, dust from old pages coating my throat. I'd lived on ramen, let my hair grow unruly, and sent every spare dollar to Sierra. $3,000 by November, just as she had requested. My dad emerged from the living room with a familiar, throat-clearing cough, his tell for discomfort. "Pumpkin," he began, not quite meeting my eyes. "Can we talk before dinner?" They guided me to the kitchen table, where my mother's electric holiday centerpiece glowed weakly. Its tiny, fake candle flames flickered in a sad, mechanical loop, like they were embarrassed to be lit. Sierra offered me her polished, benign smile, the one perfected in childhood for photo ops and parental approval. "Plans have changed," she announced, as if discussing a minor flight delay. "The cafe expansion, it's not panning out. The projections were off. So Mom, Dad, Jeremy, and I agreed it makes the most sense for you to stay back. The money's already locked into the booking." I stared at her face, then at each of theirs. They delivered this verdict with a veneer of benevolent concern, as though granting me a reprieve. But this was an old script. When Sierra won the state debate championship, my mother baked a 3-tiered cake and had custom t-shirts printed. When I landed the lead in the school play, my mother offered a distracted clap before slipping out at intermission. Sierra had called, stressed about a paper deadline. Sierra's needs were always more urgent, her achievements more luminous. 5 years my senior, 5 inches taller, and in the family ledger, her value seemed to be calculated in multiples. She commanded. I complied. She held the floor. I learned the contours of silence. You rationalize the hurt when you're young. You whisper that your turn is coming, that someday the spotlight will swing your way. That day never arrived. When I was 13, Sierra left for a prestigious college on the East Coast. I stood on the porch, waving until the family car disappeared. A naive hope budding in me. Maybe now they'll see me. The opposite happened. Sierra's daily calls became the household ritual, her voice booming through the speakerphone as my parents hung on every word. Listen to that drive, my dad would marvel, stirring a pot. She's got that killer instinct. It's in the blood. When she visited, I quietly moved my homework to make room for her laptop at the table. My gradual retreat from the family circle went entirely unmarked. Except by one person. Grandpa Jeffrey noticed. He lived 2 houses down in a weathered cedar home with blue shutters and a porch swing that sang on its chains. His house smelled of cherry pipe tobacco and aged paper, a scent that felt like wisdom and memory. When the atmosphere in my own home became oppressive, a loudness that had nothing to do with volume, I'd escape out the back and find refuge on his sofa. He never made a production of it, just shuffled over and offered the TV remote. Your pick, Roman Holiday or Casablanca? His freezer was perpetually stocked with mint chocolate chip ice cream. We'd share the carton, passing a single spoon between us in a comfortable quiet where words were unnecessary. We played chess. He played scratchy jazz records. We sat on the porch and said nothing at all. You don't have to be the loudest one in the room to be the strongest, Melissa, he told me once, his eyes on the horizon. Everyone crowds the center stage, but real power often gathers in the wings, waiting for its cue. He never brought up Sierra, never compared. He saw me. When I was 16, he taught me to drive his old truck. When I failed to make student council, he presented me with a set of watercolors. The world you want isn't always one you get voted into, he said. Sometimes you have to paint it yourself. On the worst days, like when my mother forgot to collect me from soccer practice because she was helping Sierra prepare for a grand interview, Grandpa Jeffrey would simply push a frosty bottle of root beer and an old Calvin and Hobbes comic across the table toward me. He taught me that the deepest forms of understanding often wear silence. It made me question everything. Did my parents love me, or merely the version of me that didn't inconvenience Sierra's narrative? I waited for a sign of true recognition. It never came. My acceptance to UC Berkeley came with a partial scholarship. My mother mentioned it to a neighbor in one breath before asking if they'd seen Sierra's latest startup promo video. But Grandpa Jeffrey took me out for a proper dinner. He raised his glass of cider, his gaze steady and sure. "You're not walking in anyone's shadow, kid," he said. "You're carving your own path." I didn't cry, but I gripped that glass until my knuckles ached, trying to fuse his belief into my very bones. I left for college with 2 stuffed duffel bags, a sluggish laptop, and a heart fractured clean down the middle. One half clung to a future of my own making, the other was a museum of everything I had never dared to say aloud. Grandpa Jeffrey died the spring of my freshman year. He left the way he lived, gently, without fanfare, in his sleep. There was no warning, no chance for a final conversation. The news came via a voicemail. My mother's voice was thin and unsteady, but devoid of tears. "He's gone, Melissa. I thought you should know." Just a statement, a piece of administrative bad news to be relayed. The funeral was a modest, somber affair. Sierra appeared in a stark, head-to-toe black designer outfit, her composure flawless, not a single lash out of place. Jeremy loitered a few paces behind her, a silent, uncomfortable sentinel. After the brief service, we filed into the lawyer's office. The air was thick with the scent of lemon, wood polish, and decades-old carpet dust. I took a seat at the far end of the long mahogany table, feeling like an intruder, questioning my own right to be present for the dissection of his legacy. The lawyer adjusted his glasses and began to read in a dry, procedural tone. "To my daughter, Elaine, I leave the sum of $50,000. My mother's lips curved into a fragile smile, and she reached for my father's hand, a tear of gratitude or relief glistening in her eye. "To my granddaughter, Sierra Carter," the lawyer continued, "I leave the sum of $300,000. A current of pure energy seemed to animate Sierra. Her face illuminated from within. "Babe," she whispered, leaning into Jeremy, her voice a triumphant sigh, "the mountain house is happening." Her gaze then flicked toward me, a swift, surgical check to confirm my zone remained one of emptiness. I fixed my eyes on the grain of the wood table. "To my granddaughter, Melissa Carter," the lawyer's voice cut through my numbness, "I leave my primary residence located in Evergreen, Colorado, including all structures thereon, the land, and every item contained within." The silence that followed was dense and absolute. Then Sierra laughed. It wasn't cruel, just genuinely, bafflingly amused, as if she'd just watched someone successfully fish a plastic ring from a quarter machine. "Wait. You got the house," she said, a chuckle bubbling under the words. "That's funny." Jeremy emitted a soft snort of agreement. "Could be a teardown. Sell the land, maybe get a down payment on something that runs." My mother murmured a token, "Now, Sierra," but her attention, her entire bearing, remained tilted toward her eldest daughter's radiant satisfaction. As they began to chatter about investment properties and destination weddings, I sat perfectly still. I tried to conjure Grandpa Jeffrey's calm presence in the sterile room, to feel his intention in the bequest. Was this his final gift, or was I merely the recipient of the cumbersome, sentimental leftovers? Monetarily, the house wasn't much, but its value was etched in the grooves of the scratched coffee mugs, pressed into the spines of his books with handwritten notes in the margins, woven into the ropes of the porch swing that remembered my weight. It was the one place on earth where I had ever felt unedited and whole. The confrontation began, as family conflicts in our house always did, over a meal. I was home for a weekend between midterms. The table was set with roast chicken and mashed potatoes, but the good china remained in the cabinet, a telltale sign that the evening's real purpose was an announcement from Sierra. She waited, predictably, until dessert. "Jeremy and I have been strategizing," she announced, swirling her wine with a practiced air of executive gravity. "Given the logistics of the cafe expansion, the smartest move would be to relocate our base to Evergreen." My fork, laden with pie, halted midair. She was speaking about Grandpa's house. My house. I drew a breath to respond, but my mother's voice was faster, smoothing over the moment like a tablecloth. "You know, that's actually very practical, honey. You're away at school most of the year. It would be wonderful to have the house lived in and cared for." I waited, my eyes moving from my mother to my father. No one looked at me for consent. Dad gave a firm nod of approval. "They're responsible. They'll maintain the asset. We'll treat it like our own, obviously," Sierra chimed in, setting her glass down with a theatrical finality. "We're family, after all. You wouldn't expect rent from family, right?" A wave of agreeable laughter traveled around the table. I did not join. My mind raced through practicalities: property taxes, insurance, the cost of repairs. The deed was in my name, but ownership came with a price tag. I had actually considered renting it out professionally," I said, the words quiet but clear in the sudden stillness. The temperature in the room dropped. The silence was a physical weight. My mother released a sigh heavy with familiar disappointment, the same sigh that met a less-than-perfect report card. "Melissa, why on earth would you invite strangers into your grandfather's home? Family should always come first." Jeremy concentrated intently on his plate. Sierra offered a faint, dismissive smile, directed at the space where I had been a participant just moments before. I had been erased from the conversation. That night, back in my childhood bed, I listened to the old house settle and groan around me. I held the abstract concept of legal ownership in my mind, contrasting it with the stark reality of my powerlessness. How peculiar, I thought, to possess something in the eyes of the law that you do not possess at all in the eyes of your own family. The house was mine, and yet it was already being packed into their suitcases. The word "no" existed, a solid, simple syllable in my mind. I could have wielded it. I could have told them to find their own solutions for their cafe, their life, their everything. But history was a ruthless teacher. My voice had never been an instrument that could shape their reality. It was static, background noise, easily tuned out. So I swallowed the word. It dissolved into nothing, as it always did. I sought refuge in exhaustion. My life became a brutal, precise schedule. The 6 a.m. cafe shift that left my hands smelling of sour milk and espresso grounds, 3 lectures where I fought to focus, 2 lab sessions that stretched into the evening. And finally the library's tomb-like silence until midnight. I existed on instant noodles, skipped friends' birthdays, and hawked my old psychology textbooks online. Every time the fatigue threatened to crack me open, I'd close my eyes and manufacture the fantasy: sunlight dappling through palm fronds, the clink of glasses, my family's laughter including me, for once, as a central part of the scene. I bought the lie I was selling myself. In early November, Sierra's text flashed on my screen, devoid of preamble, finalizing the booking. "Need your share to confirm today." The command was clear. Within the hour, I transferred $3,000, the entire, painstakingly accumulated contents of my savings. The hollow feeling in my gut was momentarily eclipsed by a flicker of anticipation. It would be worth it. I allowed myself to browse online for a swimsuit, settling on a simple, sale-priced navy one-piece. My roommate Dorothy, sensing the occasion, lent me her sturdy suitcase with the smooth, reliable wheels. By December 23rd, I was packed and ready days in advance, a nervous excitement buzzing in my veins. But crossing the threshold of my parents' house, the feeling curdled instantly. The physical space was familiar, lights on, tree decorated, but the atmosphere was wrong. It was a taut, silent wire of tension. Dinner was a muted affair. Sierra and Jeremy arrived in a gust of cold air and expensive perfume, their skin glowing with the artificial bronze of a spray tan, their smiles bright and brittle. They carried the scent of other, better places. We took our seats. My mother passed a basket of rolls with a mechanical gesture, her eyes avoiding mine. Then Sierra cleared her throat, a sharp, deliberate sound. Jeremy studied his plate. My father released a long, weary sigh, a preemptive capitulation. The cafe situation, Sierra began, her tone laced with grave importance, is more complicated than we projected. The numbers aren't supporting the expansion. We've all discussed it, and we think it's best if you sit this one out, Melissa. My fork, laden with food, froze in the space between the plate and my mouth. But I paid, I said, the words sounding childlike and small. Yes, Sierra replied, her lips curving into that same placid, victorious smile she'd worn when I lost the ninth grade class election. You were a huge help with the deposit. Thank you. The gratitude was a knife. I stared, uncomprehending. You used my money? It secured the trip, she said, as if explaining something obvious to a toddler. You'll just be staying here. It'll be peaceful. You can finally relax, catch up on things. My mother reached over and patted my hand, her touch light and perfunctory. Family requires flexibility, sweetheart. The question screamed inside my skull. What family? When does flexibility become the permanent posture of the one who always bends? No one else spoke. The matter of my money, my plans, my disappointment was not up for discussion. It was already settled. After the meal, Sierra went upstairs to finalize her packing. I remained at the table, watching the decorative candles melt. The wax dripped in slow, steady rivulets, like a clock counting down a grief that had no outlet. On Christmas morning, I wore a smile. I stood on the frost-tinged porch in my coat, my borrowed suitcase at my feet. They loaded their matching, monogrammed luggage into two glossy black SUVs. Their new sunglasses reflected the gray winter light, artifacts of a life that knew how to project success. You remember you have a key? My mother called, not moving from the passenger seat. I nodded. The ferns in the sunroom need water twice a week, my father added, adjusting the mirror. Sierra powered down her window, her face a mask of cheerful condescension. We'll send tons of photos. Don't feel too left out, okay? She laughed, a light, tinkling sound meant to frame exclusion as a joke. I lifted my hand in a wave, my smile cemented in place. The cars pulled away from the curb, turned the corner, and vanished. Not a single head turned back for a final glance. I stood there on the porch, alone with my suitcase, the ghost of my canceled future, and the deafening silence they left in their wake. The moment the taillights disappeared around the corner, I turned and went back inside. The energy in the space shifted instantly. This was no longer my parents' house. It was simply the house I was in. My house. Outside, a gentle, determined snow began to blanket the world in quiet. Inside, the furnace hummed, producing a heat that felt technical, not comforting. The evidence of occupation was everywhere. Sierra's tailored wool coat hung in the hall closet, displacing the familiar scent of Grandpa's old wax jacket. Jeremy's high-end shaving kit was a sterile monument on the bathroom sink. On the mantel, a glossy wedding portrait of them had replaced Grandpa's worn wooden chessboard. I stood in the center of the living room and did nothing but breathe, allowing the silence, a thick, reclaiming silence, to pour back into the corners. Then I began to work. I started with the bedroom they had used. Clothes, shoes, an array of expensive skincare products all went methodically into sturdy cardboard boxes. I moved to the kitchen. The espresso machine, the bottle of imported olive oil, the matching mugs from a Napa Valley engagement trip. I handled everything with detached care. This wasn't a purge of anger, it was a revocation of occupancy. I was removing guests, polite yet overstaying, item by item. In the study, I opened the bottom drawer of Grandpa's old desk, one that stuck, and complained. Inside, beneath some faded stationery, was a photograph. It was Grandpa Jeffrey and me, squinting in the sun on a rickety dock at the lake. Our fishing lines were a bird's nest of tangles, and we were caught in a moment of pure, helpless laughter, as if the universe had shrunk to just that boat and our shared futility. On the back, in his firm, slanting script, he had written, Melissa. The quiet ones always come back stronger. Period. I took down their wedding photo and placed it in a box. I hung ours over the fireplace, precisely where it belonged. I called a moving company. I paid a holiday premium without argument. Two polite men arrived, loaded the stack of labeled boxes without comment, and took everything to a storage unit I'd rented in Sierra and Jeremy's names. The receipt would be emailed to them. By dusk, the house was clear. The final task was the locks. The locksmith was a man with gentle eyes and silver threading his dark hair. He gave the quiet house an appraising glance. "Tough time of year for changes," he offered softly, not prying. "A change that's been waiting to happen," I replied. He nodded, as if he understood more than I'd said, and efficiently replaced the hardware. The new keys he placed in my palm were cold and sharp-edged. I did not celebrate. I made no calls. I simply sank into the familiar depression of Grandpa's armchair, wrapped the old crocheted afghan around my shoulders, and listened. The house settled around me, its creaks and sighs a language I had almost forgotten. The reckoning began at 9:12 the next morning. A text chime, then another, then a cascade. By noon, my phone was a hive of incessant vibration. "Mom, Melissa, answer me. Where is everything? All of Sierra's things are gone. This isn't funny. Sierra, what did you do? You psychotic bitch. Those were my belongings. You had NO right. Jeremy, the key doesn't work. Did you change the locks? You can't just evict us. We're family." Each notification was a frantic, digital insect. I let them swarm. The missed call counter climbed, 10, 25, 50. By evening, it read 83. The final call lit up the screen. Mom. This time, I answered. She didn't wait for a greeting. "Melissa, what is wrong with you?" Her voice was a shrill wire. In the background, my father's angry mutter rose and fell. "You didn't warn anyone. You just stole their things and locked them out." I sat back in Grandpa's chair, the phone cool against my ear. "Let me speak," I said, my voice lower and steadier than I felt. A startled silence fell on the line. "Just this once," I continued, "you will let me finish." I could hear their held breath. "You took $3,000 from me. Money I earned on my knees scrubbing floors and sorting other people's books. You spent it on your vacation. You moved Sierra and Jeremy into my house, a house given to me without my consent. You have made decisions for me my entire life as if I were scenery, not a person." I allowed the weight of the pause to settle. "And now, when I finally enact a no, not with a plea, but with a consequence, you have the audacity to act as though I have committed the betrayal." My mother tried to cut in, a sharp intake of breath. "No," I stated, the word absolute. "You do not get to interrupt. You have always said, look at the sacrifices Sierra makes. But the only one constantly sacrificing was me. Let them solve their own problems like the adults they claim to be." This house was Grandpa's final word to me. And for the first time, I am listening to him and holding on to what is mine. The silence that followed was profound. It was the first real silence I had ever shared with them, not an absence of sound, but a void where their justifications and dismissals had always been. Finally, my father's voice came through, brittle with frost. "I hope you're proud of yourself." My eyes lifted to the photograph over the fireplace. Grandpa's smile was subtle, his eyes crinkled with knowing. "Somebody had to draw the line, kid," his expression seemed to say. "I am," I said quietly. I ended the call. I held down the power button on my phone until the screen went dark. I let the quiet return. But it was a different quiet now. It wasn't emptiness. It was sovereignty. A year has passed. I am in my final semester, the final stretch toward a degree I've paid for in more than tuition. In May, I will walk across a stage, receive a piece of paper, and step into a future built by my own hands. The house in Evergreen is no longer a relic of memory or a point of conflict. It is an asset, tended to with a quiet, respectful practicality. I hired a property manager, a no-nonsense woman who found perfect tenants, a retired history teacher, and her husband. They have a golden retriever who chases butterflies in the overgrown garden Grandpa loved. They send postcards occasionally, thanking me for the quiet and the view of the pines. The rent covers the taxes and the insurance. A small, steady surplus accumulates in a savings account. No one ever taught me about fiscal independence, but I believe, with a certainty that feels like his voice, that Grandpa Jeffrey intended for me to learn. Sierra's cafe shuttered 6 months ago. The reasons cycled in her social media posts: a bad economy, a flawed location, unreliable partners. I hear through the brittle grapevine of old acquaintances that she and Jeremy are currently anchored in my old bedroom at our parents' house. There were attempts at contact, a couple of calls that went to my permanently silent voicemail, a lengthy, guilt-laden email from my mother about burned bridges and unconditional love, a forwarded inspirational meme from my father on the virtue of forgiveness. Sierra posted a sunset photo with the caption, "Some people just don't understand what family means." I read it. I felt nothing but a calm, granite resolve. I did not reply. The exhausting work of explaining my own humanity to those who chose not to see it is finally, blessedly over. In the deep quiet of certain nights, when the city outside my apartment window hushes, I let my mind travel to that blue-shuttered house. I can feel the jolt of the porch swing chain as you drop onto its worn slats. I can hear the anticipatory crackle of a vinyl record before the first clear notes of a jazz trumpet break through. And in these moments, the clarity is profound. Grandpa Jeffrey never referred to me as the younger one or Sierra's sister. He looked directly at me and said, "Melissa." He saw the individual, not the comparison. I have no insight into whether they will ever comprehend my actions. I doubt they possess the framework to genuinely believe in a pain that never sought to inconvenience them. But my understanding is sufficient. I no longer require their permission to occupy my own life, or their validation to use my own voice. Their love, or its conditional offering, is no longer the metric by which I measure my worth. Above my desk, in my own space, hangs that photograph from the drawer. Two people in a small boat, lines hopelessly tangled, faces alight with unfiltered joy. On the back, in my own handwriting now, I have added a footnote to his, "I'm still here. Still quiet. Still mine. Period." This was not an act of revenge. Revenge implies a chaotic, external strike. This was reclamation. I simply gathered up what had always, in truth, been mine, my dignity, my autonomy, my peace, and closed the door. It was, and is, enough. I learned a final lesson from Grandpa, one he modeled but never spelled out. Sometimes, the most powerful way to make yourself heard is to stop speaking entirely. To let the space you hold, unapologetically, speak for itself. Those who have ever waited in the wings, who have ever had their name forgotten while others took a bow, will understand. They will hear this silence perfectly.